Welcome, chosen one. The courtroom is not where truth is born, it is where lies go to die. Too often, people step into that place believing they can twist reality, polish deception, and walk out untouched. But what they don't understand is that the courtroom is a battlefield, and the real war isn't fought with swords or shields, it's fought with patience, resilience, and the weight of truth. Your inheritance case was never just about dividing land or reading names off a will. No, it was something far more dangerous, more scandalous, closer to a Netflix drama than a legal proceeding. While most inheritance disputes end with family members accusing one another of fraud or manipulation, your battle made those statistics look like child's play. What unfolded wasn't a polite disagreement over property. It was a war disguised as paperwork, a family feud that exposed more corruption than a politician's diary. Every page of evidence was a weapon, every witness was a soldier, and every silence carried the weight of secrets waiting to explode. They thought you would crumble. They thought intimidation, forged documents, and whispered alliances would bury you. But instead, the very evidence they tried to hide became the stones that built your defense. The snakes in the grass believed they had cornered you, but all they really did was set the stage for their own exposure. This wasn't just a case, it was a reckoning, and in that courtroom the battlefield belonged to you. Chosen one, your inheritance case wasn't just a legal proceeding, it was a mirror so clear, so relentless, that it forced everyone in that room to face the truth they had spent years trying to bury under layers of lies. You didn't walk into that courtroom with armies of lawyers, wealth, or political favors on your side. You walked in with something far more dangerous to your enemies: undeniable evidence and an unshakable stand for truth. That's why this victory rattled them so deeply. It wasn't that you beat them at their own game, it's that you never played their game at all. You stood firm, and the truth did the heavy lifting. Think about it. Every forged signature they waved around, every false testimony rehearsed behind closed doors, every polished narrative they pushed forward, it all became a reflection of who they really were. The courtroom transformed into a stage where the masks slipped. Those who once hid behind power, charm, and influence were stripped bare. Their lies didn't just fail, they betrayed them. For them, it was unbearable. Because losing a case is one thing, but losing the facade you've worn for years, that's devastation. When the judge read the verdict, it wasn't just the sound of a gavel, it was the shattering of illusions. The people who believed they could manipulate the system were suddenly confronted by the undeniable weight of their own corruption. And here's the part that stung the most. You didn't need to perform. You didn't need theatrics, backroom deals, or manipulation. All you had to do was stand in your rightful place and let the truth echo louder than their lies. That silence, the silence of someone who refuses to bend, was louder than every argument they made. In the end, the courtroom wasn't really about dividing inheritance, it was about exposing hearts. It revealed who was willing to weaponize deception and who was grounded in legitimacy. It turned into a mirror they couldn't escape, a reflection of greed, betrayal, and desperation staring back at them in front of the world. Chosen one. You didn't just win an inheritance, you forced your enemies to confront the truth they tried to bury. And now, every time they look in the mirror, all they will see is the rot that was exposed in that courtroom. Chosen one, this inheritance case was never just about property, deeds, or numbers scribbled on paper. What you won was far greater. It was the restoration of your bloodline. It was the recovery of a legacy that others tried to erase, a history that manipulative hands attempted to rewrite. For years, maybe even generations, there were those who reached into your family's story, cutting names out, twisting truths, and claiming rights that were never theirs. They thought they could bury your ancestors' voices beneath paperwork and lies. But when you stood in that courtroom, you didn't stand alone. You carried every silenced ancestor with you. You were the living proof that their erasure was temporary. That's why your victory felt heavier than any bank account balance. Because when the verdict came down in your favor, it wasn't just your name being restored, it was the entire bloodline rising with you. Every ancestor wronged, every rightful heir erased, every generation denied their truth stood taller through you. Their silence was broken the moment the judge validated your claim. And this is why the loss stung so deeply for your enemies. Because they weren't just fighting you, they were fighting the weight of history correcting itself. That's a battle no one can win. Your inheritance wasn't simply land or wealth, it was identity, it was belonging, it was rootedness in a legacy that could no longer be stolen. When they tried to block you, what they were really saying was, you don't belong. But by winning, you turned their lie into proof of their fraud. In the end, the court didn't just validate your claim, it invalidated theirs. And that's priceless. Money can be spent, property can be sold, but a bloodline restored, that is eternal. Chosen one, you didn't just win for yourself. You pulled your family's name back out of the shadows and secured it for every generation to come. Chosen one, when people hear the phrase, criminal charges loading, they think of karma, of some mystical force catching up with the guilty. But in your case, it's not abstract, it's evidence, real, tangible, undeniable evidence that has finally surfaced, and it's circling your enemies like vultures waiting to feast. For years, they believed they could bury their crimes beneath intimidation, manipulation, and silence. They thought forged wills, falsified signatures, and fraudulent witnesses would shield them from exposure. They moved with arrogance, convinced that lies were permanent and that power could protect them forever. But what they didn't understand is this: lies always leave a trail, and trails always lead back home. The inheritance battle cracked open the ground they were standing on. What was hidden beneath layers of deception started leaking into the open. Documents they swore would seal their victory suddenly became evidence of their guilt. Bank transfers, shady backroom deals, and coerced testimonies now read like a roadmap pointing directly to their corruption. They thought they were fighting you for money and property, but what they really did was build a case against themselves. The courtroom wasn't just the stage of your victory, it became the staging ground for their downfall. The very system they thought they had bent in their favor is now tightening around them like a snare. And here's the irony: you didn't even have to chase them. All you did was stand your ground and refuse to be silenced. By doing that, you forced everything into the light. You gave truth enough room to breathe, and now the law itself is chasing them down. What's loading for them isn't embarrassment or gossip, it's indictments, it's subpoenas. It's the knock on the door that strips away every ounce of false confidence. They wanted quick riches, but they wrote themselves into a story of exposure and consequence. Chosen one, this is why your victory cuts so deep. You didn't just secure your inheritance, you lit the fuse of justice. And now the fire of exposure is running through every forged paper, every fake witness, and every shady deal they touched. The system they thought they controlled has turned on them. Their greed didn't just lose them the case, it handed them their own conviction. The charges aren't just possible, they're inevitable. Chosen one, they built their case against you like a crooked house of cards. Every card was a lie, a bribe, a forged document, a coached witness. For a while, it stood tall, polished on the outside, convincing to anyone who didn't look too closely. They thought their construction was unshakable, that their web of corruption would hold. But corruption is brittle. It only survives in the dark, where no one questions it. And you, by standing firm, dragged everything into the light. That's when the rigging began to snap. Each false signature that was supposed to silence you contradicted another piece of evidence. Each witness they rehearsed stumbled when asked a simple question. Each backroom deal left a paper trail they couldn't erase. The harder they tried to patch the cracks, the louder the collapse became. It didn't take theatrics from you, it only took your persistence. Because corruption collapses under the weight of truth. It cannot survive scrutiny. It cannot endure when someone refuses to accept lies as the final word. In the end, their carefully balanced scheme fell apart piece by piece. The very people they thought would protect them began to turn, unwilling to sink with a crumbling house of deceit. Judges, clerks, investigators, everyone started seeing the pattern for what it was. Chosen one. You didn't outplay their corruption, you exposed it. And once exposed, it had no strength left to stand. The rigging they leaned on to win became the very evidence of their defeat. Their house of cards didn't just topple, it collapsed under its own dishonesty. Chosen one. Desperation always leaves fingerprints. When your enemies realized the truth could not be silenced, they reached for the most reckless weapon of all, forgery. They thought a forged will, polished and presented as airtight proof, would be the final nail in your claim. They believed that one counterfeit document could rewrite history and erase you forever. But forgery is combustible. It looks solid at first glance, but the moment someone strikes it with scrutiny, it bursts into flames. And that's exactly what happened in your case. What was meant to bury you became the very rope that tightened around their necks. Handwriting that didn't match, paper that didn't age the same, ink that reacted differently under investigation. Small details, yes, but in a courtroom, small details are everything. Forensic experts, clerks who remembered oddities, auditors with sharp eyes, all of them became witnesses against the forgery. What they thought would pass as truth became undeniable evidence of deceit. And here's the part they never planned for. Every forgery needs a story. Who introduced the will? Why did it appear at that moment? Who signed it? Who delivered it? Each question they tried to answer only created more contradictions, more trails of guilt, more names pulled into the web of corruption. Their fake chain of custody became the evidence that prosecutors needed to show intent and conspiracy. In the end, the forgery they designed to silence you didn't erase your claim, it destroyed theirs. The document they believed would secure their victory became the loudest witness against them. Their signatures didn't prove legitimacy. They proved desperation. Chosen one. Their weapon became their noose. And when the truth was revealed, the very paper they forged to end your legacy became the paper that sealed their downfall. Chosen one. What happened in that courtroom was bigger than one case, bigger than one inheritance, bigger even than you. This wasn't just a verdict, it was a chain breaking. For generations, corruption may have lingered in the shadows of your family line. Lies were told, names erased, and history was bent to favor those with power and greed. And for too long, it looked as if nothing could stop that cycle. But then came you. Standing in that courtroom, you became the interruption, the one who refused to bow to the same pattern of silence and intimidation. With your persistence, you didn't just win property, you ended the cycle. The gavel that came down didn't just mark the conclusion of a case, it marked the snapping of generational chains. Understand this. When you refused to be erased, you weren't just fighting for yourself. You were fighting for every ancestor who had been silenced, every rightful heir who had been cheated, every descendant who would come after you. The moment you stood firm, the power of injustice began to crumble. The victory reached backward into history and forward into the future. That is why the enemy panicked. Because they weren't just battling you, they were battling a correction written by time itself. And no amount of money, lies, or manipulation can overpower that kind of reckoning. Your inheritance is more than deeds and titles. It is the right to walk free from the patterns that tried to strangle your family line. You broke the cycle, you stopped the pattern, and now, generations after, you will walk in a freedom and legitimacy they almost lost because you refused to bend. Chosen one. This wasn't just a win, it was deliverance. You didn't just inherit land, you inherited liberation. Chosen one. If this story is speaking to your spirit right now, pause for a moment and claim your alignment. Smash that like button if you know the chains in your life are breaking, just like they broke in this inheritance battle. Subscribe so you never miss the revelations, truths, and victories that are rising in your favor. And type 777, my bloodline is restored, in the comments. Because every time you declare it, you're not just supporting this channel, you're prophesying over your own legacy. Now let's continue, because what comes next in this story will reveal how greed turned family into the first battlefield. Chosen one. Of all the betrayals you faced, none cut deeper than the ones that came from your own blood. Outsiders plotting against you is one thing, but when the very people who share your name, your story, and your bloodline turn into enemies, it pierces in ways no stranger ever could. Greed has a way of stripping masks, and in your inheritance battle, it revealed a truth many people cannot bear to face. Family does not always mean loyalty. The inheritance case wasn't just about property. It became a stage where the quiet betrayals hiding within your family came into the open. People you once trusted, people who should have stood beside you, revealed themselves as opponents willing to erase your name if it meant padding their pockets. That was the battlefield you stood on, not just a legal one, but an intimate war fought within the walls of your own lineage. And what made their betrayal so calculated was that they knew your vulnerabilities. They had access to your story, your weaknesses, the intimate knowledge that only family carries. They weaponized that access against you. They didn't just fight for property, they fought to erase your identity, to strip you of belonging itself. But here's where the power of your victory shines. By standing firm, you shattered the illusion that blood alone defines kinship. You proved that loyalty, truth, and honor weigh more than DNA. You revealed that some people may share your last name, but they do not share your integrity. And when greed entered the equation, they showed the world exactly where their allegiance stood. Your victory forced the fracture lines into the open. It exposed who was driven by lies and who was standing in truth. That's why your inheritance battle feels like more than a verdict. It feels like a revelation. The courtroom didn't just divide assets. It divided truth from deception, loyalty from greed, and real family from imposters hiding in plain sight. Chosen one, this is why your win matters. You didn't just reclaim what was yours, you redefined what family really means. And in that definition, you walked away not just with inheritance, but with clarity. Chosen one. The harder they fought to erase you, the more they revealed about themselves. Every forged signature, every contradictory witness, every frantic phone call was an admission even if they didn't mean it to be. They proved with their own actions that their claim was never real. Your enemies built their entire strategy on appearances. They thought if they looked legitimate, if they polished the lies well enough, people would accept their version of history. They rehearsed narratives, created fake documents, and spoke with the confidence of people who assumed no one would dare to question them. But confidence without truth is just noise. And when the courtroom pressed for facts, their stories collapsed. They wanted the world to see you as the outsider, the one without a rightful place. But in trying so hard to erase you, they ended up erasing themselves. The courtroom revealed what was authentic and what was manufactured, and their entire case reeked of invention. You didn't have to shout to prove who you were. All you had to do was stand still while their lies unraveled. And as each layer of deceit was peeled back, the truth became undeniable. You belonged, and they never did. That's why this victory is so much deeper than inheritance. It's a validation that no amount of manipulation can undo. Your name was restored not because of favors, not because of wealth, but because the truth stood firm under the weight of scrutiny. Their case didn't just fail, it revealed their fraud. Chosen one, the verdict did more than affirm your inheritance. It declared to the world that you were always the rightful heir, and that those who tried to replace you were never heirs at all. Chosen one. People often picture justice as clean and effortless, a blindfolded figure holding scales with perfect balance. But your inheritance battle revealed the truth. Justice is messy, stubborn, and painfully slow. It is not always neat. It is fought for inch by inch, and it only reveals itself when someone refuses to bow to corruption. Your enemies treated justice like a tool. They thought it could be bent, delayed, or purchased. They used forged wills, shady connections, and delay tactics to tilt the scales in their favor. And for a time, it may have looked as if the system was on their side, but the weight of truth has a way of pressing down until the scales can no longer hold the lie. That's what your case revealed. Justice doesn't rise quietly. It fights its way to the surface through contradiction, exposure, and persistence. Every false testimony, every contradictory document, every suspicious transaction became part of a pattern that no judge, no investigator, no clerk could ignore. The system may have been flawed, but when truth built enough pressure, it broke through the cracks. And in that moment, justice wasn't blind, it was piercing. It didn't just hand down a verdict. It cut through years of deceit and forced the lies to collapse under their own weight. Chosen one. Your victory redefined what justice looks like. It showed the world that justice isn't always polished or perfect, but it is relentless. Lies may delay it, money may twist it, but truth always finds a way to rise. And when it does, even the most corrupted system cannot stop it. Chosen one. The estate, the land, the bank accounts. Those were never the true prize. Property can be sold. Money can be spent. But what happened in that courtroom, what can never be erased, was the unmasking. For years, your enemies operated undercover. They hid their motives behind polite smiles and carefully constructed narratives. They pretended to fight for justice when in reality they were fighting for greed. But the courtroom stripped all of that away. Their secrets became public record, their schemes became testimony, and their reputations once guarded so carefully were torn apart in front of everyone. What they thought would silence you became the megaphone that exposed them. Every forged will, every bribed witness, every shady phone call transformed into undeniable proof of who they really were. They wanted the inheritance to define their legacy, but instead, the trial defined it for them, a legacy of corruption, betrayal, and desperation. This is why your victory matters so deeply. It wasn't just about securing what belonged to you, it was about shifting the balance of power. They walked into that courtroom with influence and arrogance, but they walked out branded by their own deceit. The neighbors who once whispered in their favor now whisper about their disgrace. Business partners reconsider alliances. Relationships that once looked like family ties are now exposed as frauds bound only by greed. And here's the most powerful part. That unmasking can't be undone. Property will change hands. Wealth will come and go. But reputations once exposed can never be repaired. The courtroom forced them into the light, and now the world sees them as they are. Chosen one. Your greatest victory wasn't the inheritance. It was the revelation. You didn't just win the estate, you won the truth. And that truth is a sentence they will carry far longer than any verdict. Chosen one. The moment the gavel dropped in your favor, something powerful began to unfold, a chain reaction. Winning the inheritance wasn't just the end of a battle, it was the beginning of a domino effect that your enemies never saw coming. They thought the courtroom would be the final chapter. They believed that once the verdict was read, the storm would pass, the whispers would fade, and they could slip back into the shadows. But instead, the verdict lit a fuse. Every forged document, every shady bank transfer, every manipulated witness statement suddenly became part of a larger puzzle, and investigators began to connect the dots. What they once controlled is now out of their hands. Emails, phone records, property transfers, and even casual admissions made during the trial are now evidence trails leading directly back to their corruption. One investigation points to another, one discovery uncovers the next. Like dominoes, the lies they built their empire on are collapsing into one another, leaving nothing but a trail of exposure. And here's the irony. They wrote this script themselves. Their greed, their desperation, their endless scheming didn't just fail to erase you, it handed law enforcement and the community a blueprint of their wrongdoing. What they tried to bury has now become the very soil from which justice grows. For them, the nightmare is only beginning. Each day brings new scrutiny, new subpoenas, new questions they can't answer without incriminating themselves further. They're not just facing the shame of losing the inheritance, they're facing the unraveling of everything they tried to protect. Chosen one, your victory triggered something unstoppable. You didn't just close a case, you opened an investigation, and now the system they thought would cover them is exposing them piece by piece until there's nothing left to hide. Chosen one, every move your enemies made to silence you only dug their own grave deeper. They thought intimidation would scare you into giving up. They thought false witnesses would drown your truth. They thought forged papers would erase your claim. But in reality, every single act of deceit became evidence against them. Their desperation was transparent. The more they tried to control the narrative, the more contradictions surfaced. Witnesses stumbled. Timelines fell apart. Documents didn't line up. They were so busy trying to bury you that they left behind a paper trail of their own corruption. Every cover-up became a confession. Every lie became a spotlight pointing back at them. And here lies the ultimate irony. Their entire plan backfired. Instead of erasing you, they exposed themselves. The courtroom didn't see you as the problem, it saw them as the frauds. By trying so hard to make you invisible, they made their own corruption undeniable. In the end, you didn't have to dig for their downfall. They dug it themselves. Every forged signature, every shady call, every attempt to silence you turned into the shovel that unearthed their own guilt. Chosen one, this is why your victory is so powerful. Because you didn't just survive their attacks, you thrived on the evidence their desperation created. They set out to bury you, but all they did was bury their own credibility, their own power, and their own name. Chosen one, when you walked into that courtroom, you didn't walk in alone. Behind you stood generations, voices that had been silenced, names that had been erased, and legacies that had been stolen. They tried to bury your claim, but in doing so, they also tried to bury the story of your bloodline. What they didn't realize is that your fight became the channel through which your ancestors finally spoke. Every piece of evidence you presented, every lie you tore down, every moment you refused to bow under pressure was more than strategy, it was vindication. It was history rising to its feet and demanding to be heard. The verdict in your favor wasn't just yours, it was theirs. It was the restoration of dignity for every ancestor who had been cheated out of their rightful place. And that's why the victory felt so heavy. It wasn't just land being restored, it was legacy. It wasn't just assets being claimed, it was identity returning to its rightful owner. The same family story that others had tried to rewrite was corrected in full view of the world. Your enemies weren't just fighting you, they were fighting history, correcting itself. And history always wins. Chosen one. The gavel didn't just close a case, it opened a lineage. It declared that the voices of your ancestors were not erased, they were waiting. And through your persistence, they finally got the last word. Chosen one. When people think of inheritance, they think of money, land, or property deeds. But the true prize you walked away with was something far greater: authority. Because wealth can vanish, property can be sold, but authority cannot be stripped once it is earned. When the judge's verdict came down in your favor, it did more than restore assets. It stamped your legitimacy in ink. It declared publicly and permanently that your name carries weight, that your claim is undeniable, and that the system itself had to bow to the truth you carried. That stamp cannot be erased by gossip, bribery, or manipulation. It's yours forever. Authority changes everything. It means when you walk into a room, silence follows. When you speak, people listen, not because of intimidation or fear, but because the truth you stood for now backs every word you say. Your presence has become undeniable proof of resilience, persistence, and justice. And here's the deeper truth. Your enemies wanted to steal wealth, but in trying, they accidentally handed you something priceless. They exposed themselves, and in the process, they elevated you. They gave you the kind of credibility no amount of money could buy. Chosen one, you didn't just inherit assets. You inherited a crown of legitimacy. You became a voice of authority in your bloodline, the one who corrected the record and secured the truth for generations. That authority will outlive bank accounts and land titles. It is the inheritance no thief can touch and no court can overturn. Your true inheritance is not in what you own, but in who you have become: undeniable, unshakable, and stamped with authority. Chosen one, your inheritance battle was never just about land or money. It was about exposing corruption, restoring your bloodline, and walking away with something greater than wealth authority. You turned the courtroom into a battlefield where lies collapsed, masks were ripped away, and justice redefined itself in your favor. What your enemies thought would bury you only unearthed themselves. What they meant for your destruction became the very evidence of their downfall. And through it all, you didn't just reclaim what was stolen, you reclaimed history, legacy, and the undeniable right to stand in your true place. Your story is a reminder that truth always rises, that persistence always wins, and that no scheme, no forgery, no betrayal can erase what God has already written in your name. Now, chosen one, if this story resonated with you, if it stirred your spirit and reminded you of your own strength, don't leave without acting. Smash that like button if you believe justice always finds a way. Subscribe so you never miss the truth and revelation waiting here. And in the comments, declare your victory by typing 1111, my inheritance is authority. Because this isn't just your story, it's a prophecy of victory for everyone who refuses to bow.